Hi lovelies, how are we all? It's Chrissy here, and today I have something a bit special for you today. Now, back in December, with the leftovers from my kit, I made a junk journal as a present for my mother-in-law. And it got a lot of questions and people asking if I'd done a process video or a flip through, which I hadn't because it was my first junk journal and it was a learning experience for me. But doing that, I've made a few in the past few months, so I thought, seeing as it was pretty popular and there were lots of questions, that I would do a process video this time around. Now, it is a long process from start to finish, so what I've done is I'm going to break the video down into two parts. Now, this is from the beginning, making my papers, my signatures, and putting the journal together. The second half is all the fun stuff where I decorate the inside of the journal, so that's going to be in a separate video. So what we're starting with here is, I like to make my papers, I guess you could say. So I start with plain white paper and I decorate them. So I use, inks and sprays or something, just so it's not plain white all the time. So I make up my signatures out of a mixture of tea-dyed paper, ink-dyed, marbled, scrapbook paper, all sorts of things. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm using my mixed media kit, those gorgeous paints, and I am just making some paper for my signatures. So I'm just starting with the packaging technique. I do a bunch of different techniques just to decorate this paper and make it so it's not so plain. Now, the blue paper up in the top corner, I had already recently dyed some in some distress inks, but yeah, I thought I might see if I can add a bit more colour to them. So this journal is going to be primarily pink based. This is for my sister. She saw me making a journal not too long ago and decided she would like one too, but she wanted a pink one. So that's what we're working with. So I'm just mixing water with the paints and just, packaging techniques, splatters, all sorts of different techniques, just to get some colour on this paper and to brighten it up a bit. If you're a mixed media fan like me, this is actually a lot of fun to do. It can take a while. When I tea dye my paper, it can be a bit of a long process because you gotta wait for it to dry and things, but I cheat and use my oven and it makes it really nice and wrinkly and crinkly as well. I haven't put any of those in this journal because she's not into tea dyeing, and it gives it more of a vintage feel, and she wanted the pink and the bright. So I do use a lot of painted, dyed, and my absolute favourite, shaving foam marbled paper. And I'm about to show you what I mean by that. Now, shaving foam, everyone's done it, I'm sure, when they were a kid. Put some food colouring in the shaving foam. Okay, start with the shaving foam, spray it, put some food colouring in, mix it around, and then place your paper on top. Now, as I got older, I got distress inks, and I started using more different colours. And it works really great with distress inks. That was the first time I'd ever done it with something other than food colouring, and it's a lot of fun. But what I thought I would try, and I hadn't done it until this experiment here, is try it with paint. And oh my goodness, it works. It is absolutely beautiful. So now a whole new world of possibility has been opened to me because I have a lot of paint. And knowing that this technique works with paint is fantastic. So as I was saying, you just get yourself a tray or a plate or something. This is my dyeing tray. I bought it from a junk shop. It's just foil. And yeah, it's just for me, so I'm not getting food contaminated and mixed in with all my stuff. Spray your shaving foam, put your colour down, in this case with the paint, and then swirl it around with a brush. Lay your paper down. Now, once that paper or the colour soaks into that paper, lift it out. Gently, very, very gently. Wipe off that shaving foam and look what you're left with. Isn't it beautiful? Now, it is such a fantastic technique and it looks amazing. When it dries, obviously it's a bit wet, but when it dries, it's so beautiful. It's one of my absolute favorite techniques, and it was also my sister's favorite. She specifically asked for lots of marbled paper, so there is an unusual amount of marbled paper in her journal because she really wanted it. But yeah, so when I have all my stuff out, I don't just make a few, I just keep going and just make lots and lots of paper. So obviously when I say make paper, I'm not physically making the paper, I mean making paper for my journals. So I'll dye it, I'll marble it, I'll ink spray it, lots of different techniques. This little squeegee turned out to be the best thing for this technique. I've struggled in the past using egg flips and all sorts of different things, but yeah, I found this squeegee in my drawer. Oh, it's amazing. It works perfectly for this technique. And as you can see, I haven't added any extra shaving foam. I've just added a bit of extra paint here and there. Sometimes I don't, see, like that. This is also the first sheet I did, so I'm just doing a double layer with a new colour, and it just gives it more interest and more colour on the paper, and it works beautifully. But it's all about experimenting. If you're going to give this a go, you can't go wrong. There is no wrong or right. Okay, there's no right or wrong in this. It is all experimenting. Get yourself, like, I think my shaving foam's like $2 from Kohl's. Go through your stash, see what you've got. If you've got inks or sprays or paint, give it a go and see what you've got. See, this piece of paper here was just a plain notebook paper. I pulled it apart, soaked it in some of my distress ink, and it went blue. I don't like just plain colour. I like a bit of texture and a bit of mixture. So I thought what I'd do is, while I was doing this, I'd do it with the blue ones as well. So I've got a blue dyed piece of paper and marbled as well. So it's really, there's no limits to what you can do with any of these techniques. Give it a go and just experiment. It's a lot of fun. So like I was saying, when I've got everything out, I just like to keep cranking out the paper. I don't, you know, just do 1 or 2 or 3 or just enough for one journal. I'll just keep going, you know. If I've got everything out, I'll just keep cranking it out. So what I decided to do is, it's all about experimenting. I've got my paint out. I have a beautiful kitchen countertop. I decided to use that as a base and see what we can do. So I just throw some paint on my countertop, bit of water, and then just start smushing my paper into it. Anything to just get some colour onto this paper. All sorts of different techniques, different patterns, and the best part is nothing ever comes out the same. It's always different. So what I'm going to do next, yep, just picking up, see, you can use anything, it's great. So I thought I'd give it a try with, a few kits ago we got some ink, some beautiful art ink, this ink here. So I thought, you know, I might give it a go and see how I'd go, just softly placing the paper, not letting it soak into the pink, but just a very soft contact with that surface, and see if I could soak up some of the ink, and it does. It was a bit hit and miss, this technique. Sometimes it worked great, like you will see in a minute. Other times, you know, not so great, so I'm still working on that one. But like I said, there's no wrong. It's all great paper to use. So now I'm done with my paper, I'm moving on to the journal itself. Now, the way I like to do my journals is I like to use old hardcover books. There is a million different ways you can make a junk journal. You can make the cover yourself out of an old biscuit box or random cardboard you've got floating around. Absolutely anything. But this is my favourite way. I love books, and making journals out of books is like, you know, dream come true for me. It's absolutely beautiful. I just love the way they look when they're finished. Now, yes, I am cutting the inside out. In my defense, I use it in my art journals, and these are old books that I've picked up from an op shop just for really cheap. So not books that interest me, but books that I like the size of and the cover of. So I go to my local op shop, thrift shop, and just, you know, now and then, I think I get most of my books for $1 or $2. You can get some really cheap books if that's where you want to go. And yeah, it's a great place to start. So then I pick out my papers. Now, my cover isn't a paper from the kit, only because, like I was saying, my sister really wanted a pink one, and this is the only pink paper I had. It turns out I don't have a lot of pink paper in my stash. The inside of the book is where I use a lot of my bits and pieces and leftover bits from the kit. That's what I love about a junk journal. It is very simple to make pretty stuff on the inside, and you just use all your leftover scraps pretty much. You'll see in part 2, because that's pretty much what I do. So get yourself a good glue. So this is the Kaisercraft glaze paste. This I found is the best. Since I've been using this, none of the pages have lifted, and because you're bending around the book cover, it is good to get a good glue. Make sure it gets into the cracks in the crease in the book. I like to use a bone scorer thingy, this thing here, just to get into that crease in the spine, because I love the way it looks. I do try not to bend it so soon while it's still wet, because it can rip, but at the same time, don't let it get too dry before bending it, otherwise you'll have a very, very stiff book. It is all about balance. It's all about, you know, trial and error pretty much. Like, this is what works for me with my products and my books. If you decide to do one yourself, you'll probably find it'll be different for you, or you'll probably find a technique that you like even more. So, you know, that's the good thing about it. You can do just about any way you want and you'll probably come out with a result that you really love. This happens to be my technique. So I do my front cover first. I put my glue down. I start with my spine. I do my spine a different color because I'm going to sew through it. There is a way when you do your stitching, you can actually hide the stitching. That's a whole nother technique. So if you're interested in that, you know, YouTube's got plenty of videos. But yes, like I was saying, this is how I do mine. So I stick down my spine first, score it, make sure I've got my creases where I like them, or where they are in the book originally. And then I glue my two front and back cover down. And then I glue the inside. Well, I fold them down and glue. This is why you need a really good glue, because what you're going to do is you're going to fold this paper around the edge of the cover. And if you don't have a very strong glue, it'll lift and it's really going to ruin the book for you. But I found, yeah, the Kitaholic glaze paste, I've had no lifting whatsoever. So I do cut the corners off on my paper. And then I just go and bend it around the corners, make sure it sticks down really good, and then I'll cover the inside. So as you'll notice, my inside is a bit ripped up, but you know, it's going to be covered. So I do the same thing on the inside pretty much, just the measurements are a bit off. I cover my spine first, but instead of wrapping around, I measure it perfectly so it's going to fit inside that cover. And then I do the same with the front and the back. I get a piece of pattern paper, measure it perfectly, and then just glue it on, as you'll see in a minute. So just cleaning up the glue, because it can be a messy process, and well, I'm just a messy crafter in general, but I find if I get glue on my craft sheet or on my desk when I lay my journal down, it transfers to my journal, makes my journal dirty. So just trying to clean up as I go. It's a new concept to me anyway. But yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm putting glue down and then I'm pulling the paper as tight as I can around the edge of the book. Now I like to pull it tight so, you know, it's going to hold and that there's no creases or anything. So it's as simple as putting my glue on the paper, pulling the paper up over the edge of the book, and then pressing down firmly to make sure it sticks really well. So as you can see, my cover does look a little stiff. Now that's because obviously I've got glue and cardstock reinforcing the entire book. So you do have to bend it and get your creases and get it moving again. But like I was saying, it's a fine balance between doing it too soon and having the glue lift or rip because it's still too wet, or waiting too long and having to fight with it a bit more and then running the risk of it ripping as well because you've got to stretch it a bit. So I like to let it dry for a bit, then put my creases in. I find that the creases do help it to bend. And once I've done my front and back, my inside and outside, sorry, then I'll let it sit overnight. Make sure everything's really, really glued well. But before I do all that, as you can see, I get my bone scorer and I score in all those creases, bend the cover back and forward a bit, and it just helps get those creases in that spine, so it makes it much easier for you to bend the book and it doesn't go rock solid where you could just, you know, use it as a fan because it's that hard and that solid. And once again, using my scorer just to get right into that crease. If you look at a hardcover book, you've got that crease on the edge of the spine, and it's good to make sure you get glue in there and then press your cardstock in so you don't have a gap between your book and the ridge of your spine. And also, it looks really good. Like when you look at the outside of the journal, my spine isn't just a straight up and down rectangle. It's got that really cool ridge, and I love that look. So that's why I work really hard with my my scoring tool to make sure I get that pressed in there to give me that look on the outside of the journal like a hardcover book. So onto the inside now. It's pretty simple. The only thing is just getting your measurements right to make sure that your front, back and spine all line up so that they're along the top of your journal, they're the same size. Otherwise you might, you know, they just won't line up and look perfect. You know, open up the cover of a hardcover of a book and you'll see what I mean. But you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'm not one for measuring. I'm so lazy when it comes to measuring. I tend to eyeball it and then try and eyeball up everything else as well. It never works for me. I really do need to learn about that one. So I'm using the same color for the inside of my spine as I did on the outside. Now this has two jobs, I guess you could say. What it does is, one, it makes it look pretty. It covers up where you've cut away the book, and two, it also helps to reinforce the spine because you're going to be stitching through it. It just helps. Now don't be scared when I say stitching. Trust me, you will see it is very, very simple. If I can do it, you most definitely can, because I am not a stitcher, but you'll see what I mean. But it just helps, yeah, to reinforce that spine. And then just measuring some of the pattern paper to cover the edges on the front and back cover, as well as pretty that up as well. And you'll find it just makes it look like a real book. It covers up all your edges, and it also just neatens it up, and yeah, it makes it look really pretty. It doesn't really look finished, like fully complete, if you don't do this. Obviously you don't have to, it's your journal, you can do whatever you like. In one of the journals I made for my boys, I actually forgot to do this, but it just makes it look neat and finished, and all your edges are hidden, and yeah, it just looks really good. It makes it look all nice and perfectly put together. So now I'm just gluing my inside pieces of paper down to cover up my cover. And I'm using the same glue, same brush, same everything. And yeah, just getting a good... This glue I love, but it spreads really badly. It's such a pain, but I figure that's because it's so good. So yeah, just spreading my glue down, and then I've cut my pieces of paper to fit perfectly, so there's no folding or tucking. It just goes straight on, just like this. So do that, well, I do that front and back, and then I place my spine. Now once again, when I place my spine down, there's lots of scoring, lots of bending and folding, just to get all those creases and things in the right places. So I really hope I'm explaining this right. This was a big learning process for me. I found some videos on YouTube, and then yeah, the rest was pretty much figuring it out as I went. I've made a few journals now, I don't know how many, but well, not a lot. I think I've made 4 or 5. And yeah, it's been a learning experience. I learn something every time I make one. I learn a better way of doing it, or you know, something I enjoy more. So it is a big learning curve, but if you do have questions, by all means leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to you and help you out as best as I can. But like I said, this is the process that works for me. This is what I do. You'll find if you do some research on YouTube, or you know, just Facebook or the internet in general, you'll find there are a million different ways of doing this. Different people have different techniques, use different products. I think most people might not even cover their journals, but me, I like to cover mine, which, you know, gives me that extra work of making sure that it's adhering to my cover and not lifting and things like that. But I just like the way it looks. So yeah, you'll find when you look around, you'll probably find a different technique that you enjoy more, but this is what I do, this is what works for me. So yeah, as you can see, just scoring that down really well with my bone folder, and then bending, lots and lots of bending, so it's not so stiff. But as you can see, after a day of drying and folding and bending, it moves just like a normal cover. It's not rigid or anything. So now we move into making the signatures. So for those that don't know, a signature is a collection of pages stitched into a book. Now when you make your own journal, you'll make a pile of pages all put together that you'll stitch in. Most of the time I do 3. This journal only has 2 because it is a smaller journal, but I do fill the signatures more than I would, and yeah, there's no right or wrong. There's no specific amount of paper that you're going to put in. You'll just start putting your papers together and then work out, you know, you want more paper, you want less, you want it fatter, you want it thinner. I like to keep mine the same size the book would have been before I tore it apart. Some people like to over embellish and make really big chunky ones, but this book is designed to be an actual journal to write on, so there's a lot of plain pages in here, because my sister's not a crafter or a scrapbooker or a paper crafter of any kind. She just wanted a journal, but she wanted a pretty one. So lots of places to write, so there's a lot of blank paper and a lot of lined paper. So all I do is I go and fold all my pieces of paper together, and then I put them all together in the signature that I'd like. So I put them in the order I'd like. As you can see, they are all different sizes. Me, I like them all the same, so I cut them down. There will be smaller ones through the journal, but the bigger ones I cut down so that they're all mostly the same size, which is the size of a folded in half piece of printer paper. So, and that seems to be the perfect size for most of the journals I've made so far. I haven't come up against the issue of them being too small. So we'll see what happens when I get to a bigger journal. That'll be a whole new learning experience. So yeah, so all I'm doing is just folding the individual pieces of paper and then slipping them inside each other to make my signatures. As you can see, I've added a doily. I'll go and get some extra cardstock and things just to make little flaps and little pockets. When I'm doing a journal for myself or for a swap or for, you know, a friend that wants all the little tuck spots and things, I'll include much more different elements like vellum and baking paper. That one's really cool. Doilies, different size scraps of paper, things like that. But as I was saying, she just wanted just a journal to write in. So most of the paper in this journal is the same size, just like a book or an everyday journal you'd have. But that's why it's called a junk journal, because you can put pretty much whatever you want in it. Now, I think the original version of a junk journal was literally you used junk, so bits from your scrap box, junk mail, pretty much anything. And that's what you can do, obviously. Me, I like to make it a bit more clean, so I use new scrapbook paper, printer paper, lined paper, things like that, and make a journal for myself or for a friend or something like that. But yeah, mine isn't an authentic junk journal in the sense, but that's the thing, there's no right or wrong. You do it whatever way you like. You make your own journal the way you want, and this is my version of a junk journal. So yeah, you will find 1,000 different examples out there of people making their own version of junk journal. This is mine. So I've decided what paper I want in my signatures. I've decided I have enough paper in my signatures to make this book the size that I like. So now we're going to move on to stitching it in. Now, don't be afraid, it is not as scary as it sounds. There are a lot of great YouTube videos that show you the stitch I'm going to use. A lot of great explanations if I do a really bad job of helping you figure this one out. But basically, I'm pretty sure it's called a pamphlet stitch. There are a million different ways of attaching a signature into a book. This is, I think, the most common way, and I believe the most simplest way. So I go through my signatures to make sure that everything's lined up in the place that I want it. So if I've used a doily or something smaller, I make sure it's in the right spot, so when I do stitch it, it's not going to be up the top or down the bottom. It's going to be in the middle where I want it, if that's where I want it in my case. So I just make sure everything's lined up. Then I'm going to, this is where I'm checking to make sure everything's lined up. As you'll see, the doily slipped down, so I push it up and make sure it's all, because what you're going to do is you're going to get some paper clips or bobby pins or a bit of both in my case, and you're going to attach it all together to hold it still. It makes it so much easier to try and stitch all of this in. So obviously you want to make sure all your paper is where you want it to be, and then you're going to use, you can use bobby pins. Bobby pins are great because they're nice and long, especially if you've got smaller pieces, elements in your journal, like I'm using now. Paper clips, bobby pins, even bulldog clips, anything to just hold it steady for you. Now, it looks tricky and complicated, but it's not. So what I do is I go and get a piece of paper that is the size of my book cover, and then I measure out where I want my holes. I don't measure in the traditional sense, I eyeball it. So I start in the middle because I generally do three holes, not 4. So I do the middle, and then one halfway between the middle and the top, and one halfway between the top and the bottom. Always mark your template with the top, because don't ask me how, but if you turn this around, your measurements are all off. You'd think they'd be the same, but no. So always just write top on your template. Literally, it's a scrap piece of paper. I've just picked where I want my holes and drawn them on that piece of paper. So now if you use this piece of paper as a guide for all of your holes, they will all be in the same place. So I line it up on my book. Like I said, I've got 2 signatures, so I'm doing 2 lots of the holes. So one on the left, one on the right, on my spine. So you pick where you want your holes in your spine, poke them. I use a pokey tool, and I have a foam mat underneath. It's actually an old mouse pad. And I lay my book down, line up my template, and poke my holes. Then when it comes to your signature, do the same thing. But obviously this template isn't the same size as the signature, it's the same size as the book. So line up the template for the size of the book. So I've got a little bit extra room at the top and bottom because my signature is going to fit inside my book. It's not going to be too far up, too far down. And then use the template as a guide to poke your holes. These holes will now line up perfectly with the holes you have already poked in your spine. Now for the stitching. Trust me, it is easy. If I can do it, you most definitely can. My sister asked how I attach the pages, and when I said stitch, she looked at me like I was crazy. I'm not a sewer. I can't sew to save my life. But this is simple. There are a lot of great videos to show you how to do this, and a lot of probably better people explain it than I can. But basically, starting in the middle hole, you go through the journal, and then you come back in through one of the other holes, top or bottom, it doesn't matter. I tend to go to the bottom every time. Come back through, then you're going to go back through that middle hole the same way you went before. Then you're going to go to the opposite hole. So in my in my video, it's the top hole, come back through and then tie it up. It's that simple. If you're confused, let me know. I'll try and do a better job explaining in the comments below. But like I said, plenty of fantastic videos that show you how to do this. It is really simple. And then just make sure you pull it really tight. I use just plain cotton, but I do double strand it because I find it's not quite thick enough on its own. But if you pull it nice and tight, do a really nice tight knot, trim your little flyaways off, and done. And as you'll see, it is in there really tightly. It holds really well. I wouldn't have thought it does, but I promise you it does. So just giving you a flick through of my 2 signatures. Oh, one thing to be aware of when you stitch them in, make sure your papers are all up the right way. I have stitched in signatures upside down in the past, so just something to be aware of. So just flicking through, showing you all my pages, and that's my journal put together. So stick around for part 2 because that's when all the fun stuff starts. See you soon. Bye.